Hey y'all, just wanted to come to you and make a quick video as I'm about to wrap up my design and put it into InVision. So in the previous video, we were talking a little bit about typography and why some of the fonts that you'll see on mobile devices are a little smaller than what we typically would do on a responsive web site or the apartment site that we did in project number 2. Unlike responsive web, the screen size is much smaller for a mobile application design. And so, we talked through on the typography video about how the largest title in Apple's iOS design kit, their own design system, is about 34 pixels tall. So hopefully you watched that video. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, please go back and start there. But at the end of this, essentially, at minimum, you want to make sure you have 10 screens laid out in design. So here I've only got, let's say 1, 2, we won't count this one and I'll show you why in a minute, 3, 4, and 5, right? So I'm about halfway there, but I want to start to maybe see how this is going to piece together and start to feel once it's inside of InVision for a clickable prototype. Before we do that, and I'll do that in another video, I'll kind of go over setting that up. I maybe just wanted to talk through a few of the things that were really helpful to me as I quickly designed this kayak enthusiast app called Yakin. One of the things that I brought over was the kind of the template of the actual iPhone itself. Let me see if I have that open here and I'll bring that up. Yep. Cool. So if you're in the Apple iOS guidelines, this design system, we talked about that in the previous video also. I just went over here and I grabbed one of these examples. I just grabbed this second one here. The reason why I grabbed it is it has kind of the timestamp as a part of it. It's also kind of got these rails on the left and right. And those are some things I think that might help provide me guidance as I build out my design. And so all I did was I copied and pasted that into my artboard here and just had this off to the side. And I'll show you what I did here with it. I selected just this this top section here where we've got kind of the bars and the graphics up here at the very top. And I need to maybe get a little bit closer so I can actually kind of click in here. It's actually not letting me do that. Oh, that's because that was on top of it. Okay. So, and that notch, I don't know anybody who likes the notch, but it kind of came back to haunt me there. And so I pull this over into all my designs because that's helpful. It's going to show me kind of where my design needs to fall at. You've probably noticed applications that maybe start below or have a start color below that top bar on iOS if you have an iOS phone. But bringing this over into each of your designs just gives you an idea of maybe where your time and some of the things you can't control as a designer, some of those utilities that the device offers. Maybe for Android, it might be kind of that bottom triangle, square, and circle. But for iOS, this is something you at the very top with the time and the reception and battery life and Wi-Fi, things like that. You just won't be able to control. It'll always be there. And so it's important when you're thinking about mobile design, especially for iOS, to kind of know where that line is. I mean, this is 44 pixels tall. And so starting my design below that. Now, InVision itself actually puts this on the actual design for you once you actually bring it into InVision. So I like to use this as a guide inside of XD, and then I delete it before I export it. I'm gonna go ahead and delete it now so that as I export it, I don't forget to do that. But as I was designing my screens, I added this to it just to make sure I knew that my kind of the top of my app was gonna fall below that space. And I wasn't designing all the way to the very top and then maybe my logo running behind it, right? We would want to avoid something like that. The other thing that was really helpful is on this was these left and right kind of guardrails here. Now this is for kind of like the outside space. And if I bring up my my iPhone myself. I have a case around it, and so it's very difficult for me to get to those very edges of my screen of my phone. And so as a part of kind of Apple's best practices, they encourage you to have this gutter left and right on all your screens. So I'm going to actually take that and I'm going to just drop it into all my screens, and you can see based on my designs that I've aligned everything kind of to this left edge here. And I'm making sure that anything that's content and I'm not anticipating kind of overflowing and allowing the user to swipe left and right is contained within that column structure and contained within those guardrails. Even on my search here, I've got those guardrails lined up perfectly left and right. And let's just check this one. Great. We're aligned left, aligned right. And on my last screen here for my trips, aligned left and aligned right. So that's just helpful. I had that over and I had that in the background as I designed my screens. And so I would say, out of that Apple iOS kit, as far as templating and understanding maybe the landscape of that product and of the screens, those two things would be really helpful. The guardrails and the gutters here, and then also kind of the top bar kind of timestamp area as well. And that's really helpful just to give you an idea of some of the things you can't control, like the time and the battery bar, but then also, having those guardrails in place. We also talked in the last video about the grid structure. So on mobile in an iPhone 10, if you're using that iPhone X preset in Adobe XD, it's going to automatically add these 4 columns for you. And that's really helpful because it gives you an idea of where that center line is. Also, if you're aligning things specifically to those columns, it's really helpful as well. You can see I kind of went edge to edge just to take up the real estate there based on those guidelines and guardrails that Apple provided. And so, you can leverage those how you need to. Here, I kind of align these close to the left and have them housed within this space for my search results. And that kind of gives me a good buffer left and right too. All right. One other thing I maybe wanted to mention, you see I have my typography here on the left-hand side. And so I really just copy and pasted and leveraged that, the presets in Apple, swapped out for Poppins. Y'all know I love the Poppins font. And just use that to build out kind of my screens. And y'all have worked on some great prototypes or some great wireframes that will give you guidelines and an understanding of how you want to lay that out. Use that typography, use the buttons, use some of the things that Apple already provides in that Adobe XD kit to make your life a little bit easier as you build that out. Here I used kind of the primary title to give a large, impactful, let's make an adventure together type of statement. That's at 34. That's the largest title inside of iOS there. And as I build out these screens, there's some things that I made custom, like this little area here is kind of custom made. I made that rounded corner, but I'm using the Apple fonts there. I'm mixing in the iconography from our favorite Icons for Design plugin in Adobe XD. But I'm also then just pretty much leveraging the Apple fonts throughout, and then also leveraging their presets for buttons and things like that. And you can see here I've got this large button that's just taken from the Apple kit itself. If I have that up, let's see, behind here. Yep. That button is just taken from the Apple kit itself, and it is right here in the UI components. And I just changed the color and changed the font, but the button was already made, was preset. I could move it if I needed to, and it was already ready to go for me. Now, one thing for me, just maybe a piece of advice, is at least for mobile design, for mobile application design, for me, it always helps to think maybe a screen ahead. Now, like I said, y'all have already done some great wireframes, but for me, I just kind of started from scratch here, creating the UI. Had some UI inspiration to go from, but especially with mobile design, I think it's important to always be thinking about, when the user taps this, what do I want the screen to do? And that's going to be important as we transition over into InVision. If you were actually prototyping this in XD and creating that clickable kind of prototype, you would see, you would be able to kind of see that interaction there within XD, but we're going to be porting it over into InVision again. And so it's helpful in that way to be able to kind of think about what's the user going to do, where they're going to click. And for me, I started here with the dashboard, and so I laid out my design, how I wanted it, highlighted the things that I thought would be important based on user feedback. Maybe it was finding a place to go quickly, seeing what water was near you, being able to access your trips quickly, and then any promotional information. The next thing I thought about was, up here on the very top, another screen that I wanted to add was what happens when the user clicks this profile image. Well, I wanted to expose some of the profile information. And so I imagine that sort of sliding out from the right to the left and just kind of laid out that screen. Now we'll take care of that interaction once we port it over into XD. But I've got some important things on the profile screen, like logging out, being able to see more personal information and things like that. Another thing that I wanted to think about in the design, at least at this stage, was maybe displaying what the search looks like. And so again, I just pulled the keyboard from that design templates, components, guides for the iPhone, from that preset XD package that we talked about in the first video here about typography. I just copied over the keyboard, and essentially what I want to do is I want to make it so that when the user taps on the search bar, this keyboard appears. And then I kind of want to demonstrate what it would look like for the user to type in Atlanta, Georgia, and see some search results. So I'm already thinking, 2 or 3 screens ahead from when I actually type in, where do you want to go kayaking? Here I'm thinking about, okay, the keyboard's going to pop up, and then it's going to transition into the user being able to type here. And then from this screen, I want to demonstrate what happens when the user taps on the Chattahoochee River National Water Trail. From there, I want them to tap on that. It's going to take them into kind of that full screen, full page information about the Chattahoochee River and the National Water Trail. Some pictures of the site, maybe some current weather and the water levels, some information about it before I prompt the user again to go kayaking. One other screen that I've designed is what happens when the user taps on maybe My Trips here down at the very bottom, or if they access it from my Trips kind of slider here on the dashboard itself. And so what I wanted to do is when that happens, I want it to sort of dissolve or kind of appear into the trip itself. And again, so I'm thinking about the interactions that I maybe want to have happen. And as you kind of experiment with InVision and some of the interactions that are a part of that, you'll get more familiar with the vernacular and being able to understand kind of, well, when the user taps this, I want it to do X. And so, for this assignment, for this milestone, I want you to be able to demonstrate the ability to tap between screens, but then also navigate between screens. So if I tap in a few screens, how do I get back? And I want to then just segue into some important things that should be a part of your design, a part of your final design here. So if you're going to include a kind of a bottom anchor navigation of 3 to 5 icons, essentially what you want to do is put that at the very bottom of your total artboard. Like we've talked about, although there's kind of a break point or an edge of the screen itself, in this instance, we're at, 375 pixels wide by 812 pixels tall. This dashboard goes way longer than 812 pixels tall. And so the way you're going to be able to do that in InVision is to have a bottom kind of nav bar, is just to put your navigation at the very bottom of that screen. And I'll go over in the InVision video how you can actually kind of pin that and make sure that it kind of stays sticky to the bottom there. One other thing that I think would be, really important when it comes to being able to navigate from screen to screen are little things like the close button or this back button or back to search or back with My Trips, kind of the page that you're on. That back button, you're going to be able to kind of highlight and make interactive so that the user can return to whatever page that they came to. The other piece of that would be really important when we actually get into the actual InVision layout is making sure that this bottom nav is kind of set up as a template that can be really easily kind of added to every single screen. So hopefully that was helpful. I just wanted to maybe go over some of the things that would be helpful inside of XD, especially as you go to lay this out. Again, I'm going to spend a few minutes here and get this populated into InVision, and then talk a little bit about some of the interactions and navigation within InVision to make this look and feel like a clickable, tappable, prototype. One cool thing while we're still in XD, before you actually kind of export your screens and kind of go through that extra step of exporting as a JPEG, what you can do is actually take advantage of that play feature inside of XD. Now, if you remember back when we were in project number 1 and project 2, you could use that play feature to kind of manipulate maybe or see what it would look like as a part of a final kind of web design. Here you can do the same thing as it relates to your mobile concept. So here it actually pulls up a preview window of my actual. Let me actually kind of close some of these out and see what will happen here. So let me pull that back up, and okay, there we go. So here you can actually kind of view what your application is going to look like once you're finished. So we're going to export, like we talked about, export from XD into InVision. But even in XD, you can kind of get a feel or understanding, are my buttons too small maybe, or is my text too big, or is it clear that there's more information kind of left and right here? Now, the unfortunate thing when we get into InVision is you can't actually prototype this scrolling left and right. If we were staying in XD, we could handle that. But because we're using the free InVision account, we can't showcase that. We can't actually pull that off, at least that I'm aware of. If you can pull it off, let me know. At least that I'm aware of inside of InVision. So if you were planning on having the user be able to scroll left and right and kind of demonstrate a lot of different kind of cards here, it would be important to maybe just showcase that there's more there, but not that you have to worry about having 6 or 7 or 8 or however many you were planning on it, because we can't actually demonstrate doing that inside of InVision. Now, if we were staying in XD, we could definitely pull that off, but because we're going to InVision, we're just not going to be able to do that. And so another thing, as we're in here, you can kind of just use your left and right arrow to see what that would look like. So here's my profile flyout, back to my dashboard. Here's where the keyboard's going to come up. Here's my search results, over here to my actual result of the water trail and kind of being able to read through that. And then finally my trips. So even in XD, before you export your images, you're going to be able to kind of get an understanding of what that looks like in the final kind of mobile application, just by using that preview screen. Let me go back to my XD file. We'll just walk through exporting one more time. It's very similar to what we did for project 2. You're just going to want to highlight any of the full screens that you want to have export. And I'm going to say full screens because there's a difference between how you export full screens versus how you export overlays. So I just like to click on the title here at the very top and hit Shift and click on the next title name and just use that to click on all the screens that I want to export. There are other ways to do it. You can go to select them in the actual Artboards panel here. I just like to kind of manually do that just to make sure I have all the screens there. You can see that my search results is not highlighted, and I'll show you what I'm going to do there in a second. So I'm just going to go File, and we're going to go to Export my selected Artboards, and we're going to want to export them for design as a JPEG at 100% design. Now, if you are dealing with any type of quality issues, you can always export at a higher quality, and then InVision will kind of shrink it down for you, and I'll walk through how to do that. Just for demonstration purposes, I might do that here right now and do it at 2x. Now, again, if you're having kind of quality issues, if you're running into exporting it at 1x and your screens feel a little blurry, you can always export at 2x and then watch that next video that I drop about InVision and how to set up that prototype. And I'll walk through what you can do to maybe have a crisper quality image there when we export. So I'm going to just go ahead and export here. I've got my JPEG design set up for web at quality 100%, designed at 2x. So it's doubling the size of this, and then I'll show you how to do that once we get over into InVision. So I'm going to export that there. You can see those are all exported. Now, if I want to have an overlay, so some of y'all might have an overlay. It might appear as maybe when you're sharing something, or if you want to use the keyboard kind of idea. There might be other things like a modal perhaps that you want to export and as an overlay. And so what you do there is make sure your layer is selected. And then you can just come over here to the left kind of panel around the artboards, and you see these little icons here. First one is to mark as exported. You can also right click on it, and I believe from here you can also mark for export. It's already marked, and so I would unmark it there if I click that. Now once I'm in here, I can just go to right click, I believe, and we're going to export selected. You can also go to File, Export Selected. And because I've exported all these at 2x and 1x, it's kind of pre-populating that for me, which is really nice. I might just do a new folder that says overlays just to kind of clean it up for me. And I'm going to rename this to keyboard. All right, so there you have it. I've got all my screens. I've got all my screens exported. I have them exported at 2x and 1x. And we'll go over that in the next video of what you can do. For that, I've got my overlays exported, and it looks like I actually messed that up. I need to export them as JPEGs. That's the as PNGs. That's the important thing about overlays. PNGs have that transparent background, and so that would be important here. Let me just go ahead and do that again. So I'm going to export selected on my keyboard, change that to PNG for web at 2x, and I should be good to go there. So hopefully that was helpful. I just wanted to maybe talk a little bit about, some of the nice things as a part of that preset package for Adobe XD for Apple devices. Then also some of the things that would be important, like the X, the back, the positioning of the actual bottom nav bar, and just how you can leverage some of those out of the box Apple iOS components and brand them and theme them to make them your own, and make them make really a really solid look and feel for your prototype without actually having to do a lot of legwork when it comes to the creative or generating your own components and buttons. So hopefully that was helpful. And again, jump into the next video. I'm going to walk through how to go about setting up some of these screens, or how I might set up some of these screens inside of InVision. Very similar to what we did for project number 2, but some new things that are going to be available to you for interactions as it relates to InVision. I'll also share some updates on what to do if you're kind of capped out in your maximum number of prototypes, how to go through archiving, and then also how to send yourself a text from InVision and actually be able to bring this up on your phone, which is the really cool thing that you'll be able to do once you have your actual prototype all set up and ready to go. So jump on over into that next video and we'll talk a little bit about that, but hopefully this was helpful to talk through what's going on in XD as I finalize my design and bring it over into InVision. So I'll talk to you all in the next video. Thanks.